am so glad to be here. And I'm also glad to be here with Carrie Eben. Carrie and I are the co-authors of this book, The Good Teacher. And today we'll be co-presenting on the principles of the book. There are 10 of them. But you'll probably find that we won't just go through 10 of them one by one, trying to give 5 minutes or so to each one, because that is probably just too much to give to you. We'll do an overview of them all, and then we're going to kind of do a deeper dive into three or four of them. Um, so, Carrie, do you want to say hello and tell everyone where you're from? Where are you sitting right now?
Hello, everyone. Carrie Eben here. I am sitting in my office in my
Mhm.
home in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. It's a little town that some of you may be acquainted with the college, John Brown University. It's right around the corner from my house, is where I sometimes adjunct as a professor. And we're located right on the border of Oklahoma and Arkansas. So that's where I am today. It's hot and muggy. So that's what
Yeah,
I hear. It's hot and muggy where you are too, Chris.
yes, that's right. Not too often is it hot and muggy in central Pennsylvania, but I'm from the Harrisburg area of PA. And there's some thunderstorms coming, et cetera. And I'm hoping to catch a flight and be able to get where I need to go. But at any rate, we'd like to just welcome you to this webinar. And if you would, in the chat box, just tell us where you're from. And if you'd like, just tell us, give us one characteristic or quality that you think makes a teacher a good teacher. So if you just, where are you from? And if you care to say what you think is one quality you think characterizes a good teacher, go ahead and drop that in the chat box, and we can kind of see
Mhm.
where you are. Oh, I like a continual learner from Michael from Jacksonville. Teachable, even a teacher is teachable, says Ruth, lifelong learner. Um, Excellent. A good teacher isn't anxious, asks good questions, humble. Carrie, I think we need to rewrite the book.
Yep. And
That's
I'm like, oh man, I can be very anxious sometimes. So darn.
patient, reads the room,
Yes,
uh, a listener,
these are
always
good.
learning. Yeah, excellent.
I
Well,
bet you probably a lot of these things fit in somehow to the 10 principles
yeah, they do.
in one way or another.
Yeah, I think you're right because one of the things we lead with is the importance of virtue, the centrality of virtue, and that means the teacher has to model it. And these are virtues
Hmm.
that everyone's describing. The teacher needs to be virtuous. In other words, a good student, and that's
Hmm.
essentially what you're saying here. Well, thank you, everyone. It's an honor to have you with us. Uh, you're welcome to ask questions during the webinar. We prefer if you do that by putting it in the Q&A box. So that way it's just easy to track rather than putting it in the chat, and we might miss it. If you put it in that Q&A box at the bottom, we'll be sure to see it and answer it. Uh, some of them we might answer as we're going because while I'm talking, Carrie might be looking at a question and then she might, you know, say, let's address this, or vice versa. But we certainly, towards the end, we will be answering your questions. And we hope to end in around like about 50 minutes from now. You're also welcome to offer some commentary in the chat box. Um, I know I wouldn't do this if it were an online class. I would not allow my students to do that unless for maybe for a certain reason I would. But it just seems to work. So if you want to just make a comment, you're welcome to do that in the chat box if you can do that. I'm going to turn it off. I won't be looking at it the whole time, but occasionally I will just turn it on and see something. All right. So with that as kind of our ground rules, let's get started.
Yeah, I'll start talking about what is the difference between a principle and a technique, because in this book there are 10 principles, and really the root word of principle is first. It's really the first thing. It's the first thing. It's kind of it's something that is universal. It's something that we can observe kind of in human nature. A technique is something very specific of how you might do something. The reason why we are talking about principles is because it really is part of how we practice the art of teaching. So a principle can be flexible and it can be used. It's something that we can wield for our own purposes in order to help a student and help learning better. So that's one reason why we have principles, not techniques. Now, I will say that there are, maybe examples of certain techniques within the book, within the principles. But in general, the principles we're highlighting that as something that we can wield, that um, we don't have to be a slave to. So you don't have to do it a specific way, but it's keeping a universal idea that works best with human nature and what is real, with our education background. So that is one way we do that. And all of these things are aligned with the purpose of virtue. And there is Chris again. I was going to ask you, Chris, how did you come up with, like, where did you start the idea of these principles? When did you start thinking about them and gathering them together? Because it started with 8 principles and then it went to 10, and we've reorganized them again within this book. But I thought people might like to know, where did you find these principles? Because I was just explaining to everyone, the principles are kind of universal things that align with human nature
Mhm.
and what is real. So what got you interested in, oh, I'm going to put these few principles together? How did you start?
Oh, thank you, Carrie. Yes, and thanks for giving that introduction while I was away. I do have sharing powers now, so I'll share my screen a little bit. It was through the 25 years or so of just reading in the history of education. I noticed educational writers um, referring again and again to some of these ideas or principles. Take, for example, multum non multa, much not many, which is a principle that means it's better to study a few things really well to mastery so that you can love and possess those fewer things rather than to superficially cover a lot of things. Seneca talks about this, others. And I just thought, oh, you keep seeing this again. C.S. Lewis said it would be far better. We should teach fewer subjects and teach them far better.
Mhm.
That was Lewis reflecting on the tradition. And when I read Lewis saying this in his autobiography, and he was echoing what I had read in other, sometimes ancient writers, I thought, oh, this is a long-standing principle. So it just came up again and again, and of course some things you also learn in conversation with people who are fellow teachers or in your own teaching. You hear a principle like that articulated, and if you've been teaching for 10 years or so, you end up saying, I've come to know that myself.
Mhm.
I didn't know there was a Latin name for it, but I've learned that we can't just superficially cover things. And then in another example, I think it was Nicholas Carr came out with a book about 10 years ago called The Shallows, how the internet is making us stupid. And he makes the same point. He says the internet is teaching us to surf the surface of things. We even
Mhm.
talk about surfing the internet and not to go deep and to shorten our attention span. And he writes about how Google is making us stupid. And that's just another articulation of this universal human principle. So that's kind of how it happened with each of these. And then just talking with educators, like you start talking about what do you do and why, and these things came up. And it's this list, of course, did not fall from the heavens etched in stone. Like these are the Ten Commandments of teaching.
Mhm.
As Carrie and I have said many times when we were working on the book, the order in which you present these principles could be different. The names that you give to these principles could be different. There could be others. There are others.
Mhm.
These aren't the only ones. But at some point you want to limit yourself to a certain collection. And I had started with 8, We expanded it to 10. Um, and so we don't want people to receive this in some kind of a legalistic way, as if this is all that there is, and just this is the secret to being a great teacher is just to follow these 10 commandments that fell down from heaven. No. And because, as you pointed out, Carrie, these are universal principles. They apply not just to teaching,
Mhm.
they apply to all areas of life, but therefore they apply to teaching as well. So it seems like the world as it's come to us has these realities. We open the book by talking about carpentry as an example, and what are the principles of carpentry? Well, one of them is don't start with the roof. Obviously, you start with the foundation and you build up because of this thing called gravity. We just might want to, build according to the reality of gravity. So that means we'll start with a strong foundation, we'll build up, and there's other principles that carpenters follow, like measure twice, cut once. And that's festina lente. Make haste slowly. It works in carpentry. It works when you go grocery shopping, by the way. Do you just grab the first thing that you see as you walk down the aisle? Might not be good for your family and for the recipe, etc. It's
Only when I'm hungry and I go
that's
grocery
right.
shopping. I
So,
was going to say real quick, Chris, I remember seeing Robert Littlejohn, who was the head of school at Covenant, until recently. He sails and he had a hat that said Festina Lente. And I was like, that's a principle. And it was just in another context. And what I really appreciate about principles is that it really gives teachers the freedom to teach in whatever context that they're in. I mean, and again, like you said, it's not just for teachers. These could be for parenting. That's why this is good for both classroom and homeschool uh, teachers. This is not just for classroom teachers. We give a lot of examples. And I was saying too, we have examples and maybe that might be a little technical. Like this might be how you could embody
mhm.
this principle, but that's not the purpose. The purpose, and that's just, an example to show you a type, but the purpose is for you to, for teachers and homeschool parents to use these principles for their own, to their own ends and good purposes towards virtue with their children.
Oh, yes, that's so true. So we'll go there. We'll talk about I'll start my slides here. We'll look at some examples. What is a principle?
Mhm,
It's the first thing.
mhm,
But I have to make a comment about Festina Lente since you mentioned Robert Littlejohn having a cap with Festina Lente on it.
mhm,
So I'm getting a little bit ahead of our presentation because that's the first principle that we'll discuss. But festina lente in Latin means hurry up slowly or make haste slowly. Seems like it's a paradox, but
mhm,
you know, you need to do this in life. And if you're a
mhm,
sailor, and his sailing boat is named Festina Lente, if you're sailing someplace, do you think it would be wise to be careful about your nautical plans, about your mapping, your planning, your fuel, your supplies, your food, the weather. You're going to want to be careful. You're going to measure twice before
mhm,
you cut. You're going to check, your journey map before you set off. You're going to go through a checklist of things. So he probably means he's going to enjoy leisurely, you know, uh, a thought and wander out out on the Chesapeake Bay or wherever he is sailing about and enjoy some wonder and contemplation. But even as he's planning his trips, he has to heed this principle. Okay, well, let me see if I can share and let's get going. So I'm looking for, there it is, right here. And now let me just change this to slideshow. Excellent. So you can see here, Carrie and I will be discussing, and we already are, the art of teaching and the principles of classical pedagogy as based upon this book. You can follow me on Substack, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's what the book looks like. Um, just came out about a month ago. So we're delighted that it's out. And if you look at this icon wheel on the cover, each of those icons represents one of the 10 principles that we cover in the book. Tried to make it practical. Now, when we say, oh, by the way, there's a website called thegoodteacherbook.com or just goodteacherbook.com. I encourage you just to write this down because the website is really helpful. We're just so pleased with our team that put this website up just about a week ago as well. Kind of looks like this. You can click on any of the principles, and it will give you an overview of the 10 principles, and also the appendices can be downloaded and printed. And the appendices are pretty cool. We really think you'll like those. Here's my Substack where I have written on the 10 principles as we were working on the book. This is what my Substack looks like. It's just Christopher Perrin at Substack, .substack.com. And you can go to an article like this, so read some brief articles on the various principles and so on. Carrie and I have also prepared and recorded a online course on classicalu.com, which is based on the book. And so it's another practical way if you're at a school or a homeschooling co-op that wants to do professional development. This course, along with the book, along with that little website, I think can be very helpful to you. And you could go there right now and you could watch the first two sections of the course at no charge. Otherwise, it's like $19.95 a month to subscribe to 100 plus courses on Classical U. Course would look something like this on classicalu.com. I've also written a book on one of the principles. It's a deeper dive. It's a small book of about 150 pages or less, just on Schole, because I think it's the one that is probably the most challenging for us to recover in our American frenetic culture. So if you're interested, Schole means undistracted time to study the things most worthwhile. There's another little book that might be of helpful to you. And then sometimes I forgot to say that this book is published with Classical Academic Press, so you can get the book at classicalacademicpress.com. Okay, now just to jump in a little bit, and Carrie will be interrupting me as needed if I don't invite her to make comments. We want to co-present. Teaching is an art, not a science. Now, teaching is informed by science. And science is important for all that we do, understanding the natural world, understanding, say, how the human brain works, and we're learning more about that, although it's still a deep mystery, is pertinent. But teaching itself is not a science; it's an art, and this is something that was written by Gilbert Hyatt, The Art of Teaching, in the 1950s. Teaching involves taking principles and putting them into practice. It requires artistry, and it involves leisure. That's something that Gilbert Hyatt says in this book. He says that a lot of us are attracted to teaching, maybe counterintuitively to some, because we get to enjoy leisure. That is, we get to enjoy leisure to spend our time with ideas and teaching those ideas to other hungry human minds. And that is a great privilege. And it's why we do it, even though it doesn't pay as well as other professions, because we love learning and helping others to learn. And we are at leisure to do so. The man or woman of business is not, and sometimes, therefore, has some envy about teachers who do have this privilege. What is a principle? Well, again, we've already mentioned Carrie was sharing, it's like a universal cosmic reality that therefore always applies. In Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart says that there are certain things that apply. The fundamental things apply as time passes by. Principle comes from principius in Latin, which means a first thing. These are the first things that govern everything else. Here's how Stephen Covey defines it in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Principles are guidelines for human conduct that are proven to have enduring, permanent value. They're fundamental truths that are unarguable because they're self-evident. Principles are not practices, although I'd add they lead to practices. They actually help us to invent practices. But principles are not practices. A practice is a specific activity or action. A practice that works in one circumstance will not necessarily work in another. But principles are deep, fundamental truths that have universal application. They are
I,
cosmic realities. Yes, jump in, Carrie. What
Yeah,
do you
I
think?
love that. Just what you just said about being universal truths, and something that we talk a lot about in classical education is the transcendence of truth, beauty, and goodness. And so this is just a reminder, and just even for me, hearing that last definition, that these are universal truths. So they're kind of ordered and structured by our creator, that they're going to be true. They're always true. And that's really one of, kind of one of the three pillars of classical education. When we're talking about truth, beauty, and goodness, this is just something, it's a true principle. You can't, if you're true to the principle, you can't, go astray.
Yeah, that's right. So therefore, teachers who are principled will be effective teachers because they are teaching in accord with the nature of human beings and the nature of the cosmos. So these you might think, well, this is 101 stuff, right? Like, how can you really miss reality? Well, the answer is yes.
Yes.
So much of progressive education is really trying to swim upstream of what is real about what humans are. And so another way of putting this is that our teaching should be ordered according to a proper understanding of the human being or a proper anthropology, to use the academic word.
And this
One,
doesn't isn't just like one bell and whistle. With progressive education, you are always going from one side of the pendulum to another. And so this is consistent, as you said, with how humans are created.
yeah, yeah. So every pedagogy assumes an anthropology.
Mhm.
So you will teach according to what you think human beings are and what they are for. So, okay, so then what are the principles? Of course, that's where we're headed. It won't take too long. Here's where Hyatt says that teaching is an art in one of his opening lines. He says, teaching is not a science, it's an art. The instinctive, dynamic, and unpredictable elements in teaching make it far more like an art than a science. Science is precise, predictable, and follows laws that can be tested and measured. That's what progressive education, by the way, has tried to do, is turn it into precise, predictable techniques that can be tested and measured that will work without fail. Predictable results if you use these techniques every time. That's me speaking. Here's Hyatt again. But teaching involves the interaction of personalities,
Mhm.
inspiration of the teacher, and the active participation of the student, which cannot be reduced to a set of fixed rules. So what Carrie and I are going to present to you is not a set of fixed rules, but principles that, if you understand them, will help you to invent the techniques that you need. Because you need to use techniques, of course. Like right now, we're using a technique, right? Well, we're using a PowerPoint and we're using the Zoom technology the best we can. And we have a chat box and so forth. And Carrie and I are having a dialogue, hopefully, in front of you, and we're going to answer some questions you might ask. But how do we know what to do? How do we know which one of these techniques to use? Principles guide us. Reality guides us. So it's worth returning to the first things in order that we get the second things right. C.S. Lewis said, when we lose the first things, if we disorder the first things, we don't just lose the first things, we lose the second things as well. So let's keep first things first. And that's why we think a book about principles is important for those of us who want to be classical pedagogues. Now, just to make the point that science is still helpful, uh, right now, cognitive science is actually helpful. We're learning more about how the brain works, how memory works, etc. It doesn't make education a science, but it just means that science can help us to understand some things about education. This book by Daniel Willingham is a great book. Why Students Don't Like School, and he has about 10, you might even say, neuroscientific principles that inform teaching. For example, the study they've done of cognitive science and the way the brain works indicates that memory is the residue of thought and even the residue of emotion. That if you're connected to something emotionally, you tend to remember it. And well, you probably knew that already, but isn't it nice that cognitive science is telling you that it's true? Factual knowledge precedes skill. We understand new things in the context of what we already know. Content is more important than process. So we don't have time to dive into cognitive science, but that's a really helpful book. And so is this one, The Master and His Emissary. This is a newer book by Ian McGilchrist, who studies the way the two brains work together and separately. So these are just some reasons why education is an art. So as we go into our presentation, that's informing how we think about teaching. It's an art, and therefore we need to know the principles that help us to be, artists, educational artists, rather than technicians. If you're too concerned about techniques, you'll be tempted to become a technician who always will need someone to tell you what technique to use and when. Imagine the carpenter or an apprentice having to ask all the time, should we use a 2x4 here or a 4x6 or a 1x6 or a 1x1? Should I use long nails, a big hammer, a small hammer, finishing nails? What do I use? Could I use a drill here? Um, a good carpenter, knowing the principles of carpentry, will know what tools to pick up. And after a while, it's just second nature. It doesn't even, it's almost as if you do it without thinking. If you're putting up 2x4s and you're framing a wall, you would use a framing hammer designed for that purpose, not a finishing hammer. Now here,
Chris, I was
yeah, jump in.
Chris, I was going to say, one of the biggest roadblocks for many teachers early on is being stuck to a curriculum. Have
Hmm.
you found that, you're teaching that they just want to, if they just follow the curriculum, they do all they, they read all the things, they do all of the exercises, then, that is good teaching that they finish. And I think that this is one of the
Hmm.
as I said, roadblocks to good teaching, when teachers are feeling kind of that pressure and they're not exactly sure or confident in their ability to teach, so they stay in the curriculum and follow that curriculum to the T. Now there's something to be said about staying close to the curriculum and what it gives you, your first couple of years of teaching. But what I feel like these principles do is really help. It really helps the teacher. I said it before, just frees them to be able to use the curriculum is made for them,
Yeah,
not them for the curriculum.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and and I say that about assessment. I think there's a axiom there in somewhere in the Gospels about the law was made for man, not, man. Did I have that right? But
It's the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the
sorry,
Sabbath.
yes, Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that's, this just gives teachers guiding principles in order to use good curriculum, not to finish it.
What a great quote to apply to assessment. We should have put that in the book, Carrie. But yeah,
I thought we did. I use that one all the time.
okay, maybe it's there. Um, well, this is an important point. Curriculum is the course you take
Mhm.
first. Secondarily, it's a set of printed materials that help you, that serve you. But sometimes new teachers feel like they actually have to serve the curriculum, the printed materials,
Right,
and follow it to a T. And then they're anxious about whether or not they're doing it properly, using the right techniques, and if they're on pace, and so
right,
on. And then they don't think they're teaching well. And that would be an example of becoming too technical
right,
to the point where you're not liberated to actually use resources as the ruler of those resources, who knows how to prudently and wisely deploy them, because you're a principled artist as a teacher rather than a subservient technician. And you can
right,
become subservient to a printed curriculum just like you can become subservient to various techniques.
right. These
So
principles make us wise, I feel
yeah,
like, as a teacher, and prudent.
yeah,
So they give us kind of boundaries by which to make good choices in the moment every day of our teaching. And then that builds confidence. And so if teachers can embody these principles, really not just in their teaching, but they actually like embody them in their life. And I think that's where it starts too. These are not just for, I'm going to embody these in the classroom, but nowhere else. I
Yeah.
really feel like we have to embody these as humans.
Very good point. That the more lived experience we have as human beings, that should make us better parents, better community members, better citizens, better church members, better teachers.
Mhm.
So acquiring wisdom is always helpful to the teacher, and these principles will make you wise. And as
Yes.
the way Carrie put it, I think it's just great. So you can make wise choices, so you can know what to do in various teaching circumstances. Now, here are three circumstances, or at least three settings that you see in front of you. I wonder if you can name them, because they do have names and they have a variety of names. But there are really only three main modes of teaching, three settings, you might say, and here they are. And what would you name them, I wonder? And I just let you in the chat box if you want. Go ahead and like from left to right is one, two, and three. How would you name one, two, and three? What teaching mode is this? So I'll just give you an opportunity to try to name them. And I bet that we'll see different names. And it's okay. There can be various interchangeable names for good principles or good modes. But I wonder what you would call these. So the first one is I'll call it a Latin term, lectio. Maybe he should be standing, and then you would think, oh, this is a lecture, but he's before a class that's all frontward facing to him, the teacher. This is the lecture.
Mhm.
The second one is sometimes called the seminar, or the Socratic conversation, the table talk, where it's textual. Everybody often will have the same text in front of them, and notice that the teacher's sitting down, kind of being a co-student, a fellow student with the class, and then there's the tutorial. Okay, so how do you know which one of these to do? Well, that would take wisdom. How do you know when you need to do the tutorial? A good teacher with acquired experience, will know when it's time to break someone out one-on-one. When do you lecture? When do you sit down? Well, we won't try to answer those questions now, but it takes some experience and wisdom to know certain realities will govern what you can do. If you have a class of 100 students, how many tutorials will you do? Not many. How many lectures will you do? A lot. So, okay, that's just one reality that we have to pay attention to, class size. All right.
Mhm.
So, principles and goodness. Here they are, but I'm going to just skip ahead for a moment to this image. At the very beginning of the book, we say that if there's a virtue, excuse me, a principle of principles, it might be virtue. That just like the carpenter says, don't start with the roof, begin with the foundation. The good classical teacher says we begin with virtue in mind. We begin with the end in mind. And we begin with this idea that we want our students to grow in virtue, which means virtues. It means all the individual sub virtues that come underneath this heading, like love, humility, diligence, constancy, courage, temperance. And it means overcoming the vices like pride, sloth, inconstancy, irregularity, capriciousness, fear, excessive ambition. In fact, it could be that we think of the whole process. All of these principles involve the cultivation of virtue. Each one of these principles is another way that we help students to become more excellent, more good at being a human being, doing what only humans can do using word and number and acquiring wisdom and eloquence and all of these different virtues. What would you say about that, Carrie?
Well, I was just going to add that for those people who may have been a part of your earlier sessions on the principles, either when they were just 8 or when they were 10, and in our first your first iteration of the 10 principles,
Hmm.
virtue was actually considered, it was one of the principles. with the others. And what we've done here in with this book and how we've adjusted it is actually it's really the guiding principle of all the principles. It's the
Yeah.
whole aim of education. And so it's we begin in the I believe is in the introduction talking about the principles. And I love um I love that introduction, and even in the appendices where we list the virtues, we list, the virtues and vices and kind of the golden mean, and give some good language into the different types of virtues, the cardinal virtues, spiritual virtues, academic virtues, even physical virtues. That those are the end. So we, like you said, we begin with the end in mind, and that is virtue. So it's been kind of elevated to out of the principal wheel into the center of the principal wheel. So some people might notice that difference as just
Yes.
the overarching principle.
Thank you for that. It's we thought that it deserved a central place. So now you might say, well, then there are really 11 principles. Well, okay. If you think of it as a principle, you can. Then maybe it's the firstest principle, but it's certainly it's the end and the center, and you could even argue that it's the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Christ is the means and the end. He's both the one who makes us holy and he is holiness. Um, and that leads us to another kind of metaphor or a diagram, which is to say, assessment also is very important. We're always assessing how we're doing in this process. And so we kind of imagine assessment as a ring around the whole thing, because assessment isn't just something you do on Fridays with a quiz. Assessment means to sit next to somebody from ad cedere in Latin. It means to to know how someone is doing and to know what they should do next to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a pretty substantial appendix on assessment where we explore this. So we haven't even talked about the principles yet, but we're saying, although we did touch on festina lente and multa non multa, at the center of everything, maybe at the whole of everything is virtue, and we're always assessing. And then one last comment, and then let's just jump into the principles, at least the first three or four, is that we've titled the book The Good Teacher because we want teachers to be good in two senses. We want them to be good at their craft, right? We want you to be a good, skilled pedagogue, and these principles will help you to do that as you become deeply aware of them and they deeply inform you. You'll know what to do. You'll become free. You won't be a slave anymore as a teacher, or as much of a slave as you might be, or as subservient as you might currently be to being a technician or being bound by a printed resource. You'll be liberated. And we want you to be liberated as a principal teacher. But we want you to be good in another sense, which is to be that model of goodness, be that model of virtue yourself before your students. And this perhaps is another principle of principles, and that is that the student is going to become like you.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus says in Luke 6 that after a student, when a student's been fully trained, he'll be like his teacher. And that's the purpose of this diagram, is to show that, well, you're going to replicate yourself in the life of a student. And these principles um, put into practice throughout a school, K through 12, will help to form somebody, form another human being who will be like you. So this is always a kind of admonishment to all of us to ensure that we're growing as students, that we manifest and exhibit these virtues before our students. So any one of these principles that we talk about is a means to virtue, and therefore we have to embody these principles personally. Comments from you, Carrie, before we jump in on the first three or four?
Well, before we jump into that, I wanted just to briefly share really how the book is organized and kind of what somebody could expect if they haven't purchased the book yet.
Mhm.
We do have, like Chris said, the website which has the appendices, which is great. I've received really good feedback on the appendices of just, here are different kind of just outlining all the things that some new classical teachers are, they're hearing new language and things like that. And it really just outlines it. But, we start with the introduction, which is virtues. Our first appendix, we end with assessment, kind of as the guide. And then we go through each of the chapters. And in each of the chapters, you're going to find an example of this universal principle in the world, and then examples in the classroom, which I will say sometimes those things overlap. And actually, I'll mix up all the time. And I think it's interesting about the principles. What one example could be used for many different principles because they all overlap. So, but each chapter you're going to get an example in the world, example in the classroom, and then we lay out different types for different age groups of students. We always have a place of, okay, here's how, here's the principle, but what are distortions of the principle and how is it being just,
Mhm.
here's what not to do and here's what it is not, as we practice definition. And then we also give, we intertwine assessment and virtue, from the beginning, and we intertwine assessment and virtue between in each chapter. So we share how this principle helps our students become more virtuous. And we also give assessment questions at the same in each chapter too. So we do have those two kind of they flank um they flank what we're talking about. We begin with virtue and end with assessment, but each of those is intertwined throughout the chapters. So that just gives you an idea of what to expect. And the feedback that I've received so far, one being my 92-year-old fifth and sixth grade teacher called me again yesterday after she finished the book and said, I just think it's so great that you have assessment questions because teachers sometimes they don't, they're not assessed enough. I don't remember being, assessed much at the private school that I was at. She said, but we need to ask those questions of ourselves. Are we doing this? And I thought that was very sweet feedback.
Oh, that's lovely. Um, as, Thank you for mentioning that. And that would lead me to comment that if you go to the goodteacherbook.com and Jay or Courtney, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat box, if you haven't already, I haven't checked, that website, it's simply goodteacher.com. No, good teacher book,
Book.
good teacher book
Teacherbook.com.
dot com because you can download the appendices right now. You can see those the charts on virtue and vice that we have, the
Right.
checklist that we have, the summary of the 10 principles,
Right. You can get a
right?
summary.
And we spent a lot of time on those appendices, and now we're just giving them away for free. Jay, go ahead and turn off those appendices. I'm just kidding. You'll enjoy them, and we're glad to give them away. So here are the 10 essential principles. We're going to give you an overview of all 10. This will be kind of quick and not that satisfying, and then we're going to focus on the first four. Um, it just would take too long and be tedious if we tried to teach you in any detail more than just a few of these. Sophesti nolente, multum non multa, and repetitio mater memoriae are like triplet sisters. They're very, as Carrie's already saying, these are all related to one another. Two or three of these principles can be activated in one teaching strategy. So they're all interconnected. Festinolente means in Latin, make haste slowly. Multum non multa means much, not many. And repetitio mater memoriae means repetition is the birth giver or the mother of memory. Songs, jingles, and chants, I think you know what they mean. But these four really are tightly connected like siblings. So let's go through them just very briefly. Festi and lenti means make haste slowly. Multum non multa means much, not many. Do fewer things to mastery rather than a lot of things superficially. And repetitio means to keep reviewing important things, to keep circling back to things that are really important and profound and good and true and beautiful until they become your permanent possession. And songs, jingles, and chants means sing the things that you want to possess. Because when you sing something, it creates delight and it creates an emotional connection and it enhances memory.
Mhm.
So, can you see the relationship between these four? We're going to focus on those four, but let me cover the remaining six just so you know what they are, and then hopefully be motivated to go buy the book, which is reasonably priced, by the way. Um, Wonder and curiosity is that principle that says if we don't wonder at something, we're not going to be pulled in to love it. And we need to have moments of wonder where we are stimulated to become curious and inquisitive, and we become aware of our ignorance and astonished at something that exists that we want to know more about. And that therefore it it makes us a student. It truly we are filled with zeal, which is what studium means in Latin. Wonder creates zeal or studium, and it turns us into a student. And if we're really turned into a student in out of wonder, we'll become our own teacher. Embodied education means that we have to pay attention to all five senses and that environment matters, the way we organize things, the way we move through a school, the way we decorate our classroom, the way we organize desks, the decor, the art that's present, the visual field, the sonic field, even the olfactory field, what you smell is important. And so we start paying attention to the liturgies, the formative practices that actually create love for something good. And we also, there's another form of embodied education that means we provide opportunity for direct encounter with good, beautiful objects. We want knowledge to be poetically made in us because we have opportunity to actually wonder at something. This could be, for example, just staring at something very beautiful that's presented before your senses. I often use the example, it's my favorite, of the stick bug because the stick bug is crazy thing that exists in this world. They're all over Pennsylvania. They are sticks that are actually bugs. Or are they bugs that are actually sticks? That you can't, they look like they're sticks. And so when you see one of these for the first time, it astonishes you and it will be something will happen poetically, meaning that you won't start bursting into verse, but something will be made in you when you have that kind of deep encounter with reality. And Scholian contemplation means that we provide a kind of disposition and setting where this is more likely to occur. This means that our school, our homeschool setting, our kitchen table, our school classroom, how we're outside, where we meet, the dinner table, the seminar table is set apart as a sacred place, made beautiful and made unrushed and without interruption, so that we might be able to engage in wonder, discussion, and truly encounter something poetically. Schole means undistracted time to study something worthwhile. Contemplation means to be, literally, etymologically speaking, it means to be in the temple. It means to be in a place that's set apart for something holy. And ironically, Schole is the root word for our word school. So where's the Schole in school anymore? Docendodiscumus means by teaching we learn. It's a very simple principle. You know it already. And that is when you, because you're a teacher, when you teach something, you learn it. You learn it better when you teach it. You learn it twice as well if you have to teach it. So why don't we allow our students to teach back to the class important things that they're learning? Not that they replace the teacher, no, but they should be given some opportunities to be teaching to their fellow students, teaching to one another, so that they would actually learn more deeply. And other things happen too. Delight happens, attention happens. Students will pay more attention often to a student who gets up and teaches them something than to a teacher. Optimus Magister Liber Bonus S means that the best teacher is often a good book. And this just underscores how important it is for us to choose the right books that this particular student or this particular class needs at this point in their journey. And it requires the prudence of a teacher as like a coach to know what to give, what should what and to know how many books. That gets to multum non multa. You can't give them 50 books. You can't even give them 20 books. How many books do you give them and in what order and what will they be? The right book at the right time can change a student's life. And then lastly, conversation and friendship is this perspective on all teaching that means that we're engaged in a kind of academic and transcendental, holy conversation with our students surrounding the things that matter most: knowledge, truth, goodness, beauty, holiness, a good life, wisdom, eloquence, virtue. Uh, it's a dance, and conversus in Latin means to turn with. So it's like we are engaged in an ongoing conversation or dance with our students in the context of a friendship, an appropriate friendship between an older student and a younger student. We call the older student a teacher, and we call the younger student a student. And then on the side there, you see virtue and assessment are are a part of the entire endeavor. So that's like the 5 minute overview of the whole. And I know that's not too satisfying, but now we're going to conclude by just looking at maybe the first three or four. So let's do that. And then, Carrie, I'll let you introduce this first one. Fascinalente. What is it? Why is it important?
Well, usually when I start, when I open up this conversation, my favorite thing to do is to lead professional development and hopefully um, practice what I am teaching and giving that as an example as I'm doing it. And so we spend some time making hay slowly just by looking at this icon here. Like, what is, how can this be? How can this be? And what are the consequences of that? And
Mm.
so when I talk to teachers about this, we do go ahead and go into um, just, how do we know this? How do we see this in the world? And something that we can observe, just as a quick example, we talked about making hay slowly when you're sailing. Of course, you have to order those things, and you don't want to do anything quickly or too hastily, but at the same time you want to do things with intention. But one of the examples that we use in the book is how a tree grows. A tree does not growing a tree is not quick. I mean, and growing a human is does not go quickly. There are a lot of things that go into into a tree growing. We have the sun and we have, roots growing, but it certainly is not a fast thing. The uh, but the end is that, over time, you are going to have a very, very strong tree with very, good roots, a good soil, and then fruit, bearing fruit. And I think the same, and we see this in it's Psalm 1, correct? Where the tree is growing. It's Psalm 1 or Proverbs 1. I'll have to look.
No, it's someone. Yeah,
Psalm 1. Okay, good. I had it
the
right.
tree planted by streams of
The tr-
water. Yeah.
exactly. And so you have to have that soil and that foundation for something to grow well, but it does not take it's not a fast process. And if you're a parent, you know that these things take time. They take an entire lifetime. And so we should apply this principle when we are, talking about our students and talking to them and giving them examples, that we should teach them how to, when they're learning, how to be intentional in their learning, how to be careful in their learning, how to start, with the end in mind, but have a plan of action. And we need to do that as teachers, but also just being patient, and know that it takes many, many hours and many, many years and much practice in order to get something. It's not, I think so often progressive education just assumes that, everyone is going to get a we're going to just learn all of these facts, skills, and ideas in 1 year, and then we have to move on to another grade level. But that's just certainly not true. It takes time.
Yeah, which is one reason you see on the slide the 13 years. We have 13 years with students
Mhm.
acquiring a vocabulary, facility with English, ability to speak, argue, write well. These things will take time. The 10,000 hour study, people have probably heard about that it takes 10,000 hours, just like 3 hours a day for 10 years in order to get as good as you can at playing the violin, as
Mhm.
good as you possibly could ever be at doing any skill like golfing, playing the piano, or becoming a great writer.
Right,
These things just take, uh, and that relates to the repetition, but
right.
also mastering each step. And that
Yeah.
sometimes feels slow. When you wait, think about it with teaching mathematics. If you want to teach students long division, you can't just start with long division. Students have to know how to add, subtract, and multiply really well, or long division is not going to happen. Same thing with Latin. You're not going to do Latin grammar well if you haven't mastered vocabulary. So you have to master the first things in the proper order and sequence and not go farther, not speed ahead prematurely. Um, and think, let's go back to the sailing analogy. Oh, I think I can get there. Maybe you make a few shortcuts, not spend the time actually plotting. I'm going to get on an airplane soon. And recently I was on an airplane and the pilot was talking about flying around a thunderstorm. Well, Mr. Pilot, the quickest way back home is a straight line. So why don't you just go straight through the thunderstorm? No, he had to festinolente. He knew that we were not going to sail through a thunderstorm, so he planned. He obviously carefully planned the navigation to get us safely to the next location as soon as possible, but safely. So master each step is one of the principles here, and is true of Latin to be sure. It's true of warfare. It's true of publishing. Here is a Roman imperial coin, and the image is the dolphin and the anchor. The dolphin was thought to be the fastest fish. That's the festina, make haste, and the anchor was thought to be lente, slow, stable. These two things are held together in a kind of creative tension. The Roman army understood this. Uh, the Roman army would win its battles really fast. It could win decisively in battle and war. How so? By slowly and regularly practicing its military drills. The name for the Roman army was exercitum, which means exercise. They were
Mhm.
always exercising, regular, slow, you might think, practicing. But then when it came to battle, they would win quickly. So it was Festina Lente was a general's, a military motto. And here's a publisher who uses the same symbol, the dolphin and the anchor. This is Aldus, is a Venetian publisher, and he uses this because and this is he 1500s. Get the text right before you print it. Take the time necessary to get a good text edited, proofed, designed, proofed again, and then sent out to the public. What happens if you just try to cut corners and didn't do the lente? It actually would slow you down as a publisher. And as somebody who is a publisher, I learned this the hard way in the early days by releasing books that were not properly edited. It's embarrassing. It actually undoes the work. It slows you down. You lose credibility. Your company will not grow as fast if you release poorly edited books.
I think we can make up time as if we master the skills and with teachers, if they kind of just believe in that principle that they take the time to master skills, they'll go further and farther, you know, farther over time. And they will end up kind of redeeming some of that time in
Yes,
the long run.
because they won't be spoiling work and having to go back and readdress and fill up gaps that they've left. So yeah, that's a critical insight. If you don't master each step, it means eventually everything breaks down and then you have to go backwards. And backfilling is a lot harder and slower than just doing it right the first time. mastering it as you go. Obviously, this requires some prudence if you have a class of 35 or 40 people who are
Mhm.
moving at different paces. But nonetheless, it's a reality. Here's another version of it on a coin from Caesar Augustus. I think it's Caesar Augustus. It's one of it says Augustus there, but all the Caesars were called Augustus after a while, after Caesar Augustus. The crab and the butterfly. Again, festina lente. Here's the turtle and the sail. The turtle being the lente and the sail being festina. So you see, this was just emblemized, illustrated in all kinds of artifacts in history. And there's the rabbit coming out of the snail, festina lente. Maybe you think of the tortoise and the hare here
Mhm.
as an example of festina lente. The second one is multum non multa, and we've discussed it a bit. It means that we should do some deep diving rather than just jet skiing over everything, and that it's better to master a few things than to cover content. Um, I already cited Lewis, who said we should teach far fewer subjects and teach them far better. When you teach 7 periods, 43 minutes a period, you teach in 7 periods probably actually 10 or 11 domains in those periods. When you add electives and the way we subdivide various courses like language arts, we've got writing, we've got spelling, we've got vocabulary, we've got mechanics, we've got grammar. There's 5 things that sometimes we do with 5 curricula and under one course heading, and then we're testing these students regularly on all of those things. Is it any wonder that by the time kids are 12, they don't like to learn anymore? Which leads us to make comments about grading. Modern grading is also a problem, but we don't have time to address that in this particular session. So we need to deep dive. And this means think about this when it comes to literature. How many books should you teach a 10th grader? Should it be 15 novels in a year? How'll that go? How about let's double it, make it 30? Why not even do more good stuff? Obviously, you can't do that. There's a line you don't cross. Well, then what would this reality tell us is actually possible for students to learn well and still love what they're learning? If they can't linger over something, if they can't ponder it, relish it, actually, contemplate it, are they going to benefit from it? How many times have you had to cram, read something, way into late into the night in order to get ready for a test, then you pass, but then forget all the content later? Why do we keep doing that? So if you paid attention to this principle, you might actually shorten the list of books that you study in a given year. You might, when it comes to teaching history, you might do the same. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't survey a broad swath, but we can do that in a short period of time, and it's a survey. But what we want to privilege is the wells, the deep wells that we dig, that where students can really be refreshed and really learn to love something. And when it comes to like eating your favorite meal, you don't want to eat your favorite meal in 5 minutes because you can't enjoy it. And you're not going to learn to love a book or any idea or a language or history if you're constantly just trying to move over the surface to cover material rather than to uncover it and to rather than to possess it. Here's Lewis's poster that I found at the Ambrose School in Boise, Idaho. Teach far fewer subjects and teach them far better. What would you say
Chris,
about
point.
repetitio, or do you have any comments about multum non
Yeah.
multa?
Yes, and we have a question as well too. So I was going to just mention, the icon for multum non multa is you see is pruning shears. And so we need to think of the word edit. Anytime we are, um, you know, I think of decorating my house or when I am actually getting dressed fashion. I mean, you can do too much and have too many things going on, and it will kind of subvert the vibe that you're going to when you're talking about like you decorating a house or fashion sense. And we need to do that too. We need practice editing in our own teaching. And we do this as a CRC apprenticeship mentor. We practice mimetic teaching and we practice teaching one logos or one, basically, if you want the modern term, one objective one thing at a time, and we have to work on that one thing at a time and go deep, because if we start doing too many things at once, we don't do anything well, and the purpose is not absorbed. Joan had a question about multum non multa. She says, for history, would there be a value in jet skiing in K through 8th and deep diving in 9th through 12th, so that the student has a broad overview of history, that when they deep dive later, they're able to place those events into the greater context? What do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a question of prudence. We can teach a large swath of history. Like let's just take World War II. World War II, you know, let's make it even broader. The American Revolution. We want to study the American Revolution. You could take a college course on the American Revolution to be sure, do a deep dive just on that. Um, but we can teach the American Revolution in a way that gives the opportunity for some contemplation, reflection, and um, rumination. Uh, what we want to get away from in terms of me and teaching history is just skimming the surface so that we can't actually pause, reflect, and enjoy. Now, the way, say, someone in sixth grade would study the American Revolution, obviously they're not capable of understanding everything as in the depth they could, say, as a 12th grader, but there still should be opportunity for pausing and reflecting. If we're not actually taking time in studying the study of history to examine what was good, what was bad, what could have been, what should have been, where the virtues are displayed in various characters and where the vices are also displayed in various characters, then it's not interesting.
Mhm.
Because if we're not studying something that's true, good, and beautiful and contemplating it, it's not going to be interesting to a human being. You can do it, prepare for the test. So
Right.
you can study a wide swath of time, but you've got to contemplate it. You've got to be able to summarize that say the American Revolution to a set of issues and persons and people and 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 ideas that are worthy of contemplation. And if you're going so fast that you don't have time to actually think, it's just test prep. As soon as you slip into that kind of test prep model, you're jet skiing
Right.
because you're not
I
going to
think you
remember.
have to teach them how to love something. You have to give them opportunities, I think, at every age, to go deep so that they love it. I think a way to kind of to do some jet skiing that I think that is effective in my experience, with my own students and my own homeschool students, is learning, geography and certain, particular people and places and times
Mhm.
that, throughout history, on a timeline. So they have a general idea, and they also know places on a map, so they can have a visual of that. And then going deep, and you can't go deep on everything. You can't, but you hope that when they love just one thing, that they'll on their own then find those other things that are attached to that too.
Yeah,
And that's what I've
yeah,
experienced.
yeah. That's right. The timeline is a great example of kind of the survey, but even the survey can be done in interesting ways. That it's not just test prep, and I guess that's the earlier point I was trying to emphasize. But you can cover a broad swath and do it
Mhm.
in ways that are meaningful, not test prep. But
Right.
then but you still want to privilege um, the multums. And then think of it this way, like, and I think this is true even with K through 8. Um, while you're wanting to acquaint them with a survey of large swaths of time and knowledge, um, the way to best do that is to keep doing deep dives along the way. Yes, you pop out of the well. You pop out of the well, like let's just say you're studying Roman history. You need to know the timeline. You need to know the emperors. You need to know the founding of Rome as an empire and then as a republic. Okay, sure, but as you're looking, you keep going into these wells where
Mhm.
you have something meaningful to contemplate. So
Right.
it might be, for example, if you're studying the history of Rome, that you take some time and really focus on Augustine's life, who lived at a time when in late antiquity after Constantine's edict, and edict and the church was being formed, and maybe a deep dive of Constantine himself and his conversion.
Mhm.
That will create interest that will then the students will be reading broadly as a result. And here's the special sauce. If the students are learning to love, say,
Mhm.
Constantine the Great, they'll pop out of that study and guess what they're going to do on Saturday morning? They're
Mhm.
going to want to read more
Right.
about Rome. They're going to want to read about Augustine. They're going to get their book out. They're going to be their own student.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the interesting payback is that if you can help them to love something in Roman history, they will start reading Roman history on their own and acquire that broader knowledge. Not that you don't give it to them in various ways, like you mentioned with geography and so on and timelines. Well, let's go to repetitio. And I think we can do these next two pretty briefly, and then we'll just go to your questions. Repetitio is about seeking something. It's not just rote. And people hear the word repetition, they think, oh, it's a waste of time. Just do it once, give them the quiz, move on, give them the grade. But no, you know that you have to review things for it to become permanent. And if it's something really good, you want to. So you've got a favorite poem, you've got a favorite movie, you've got a favorite book, you've got a favorite restaurant, favorite song. You visit these things again and again because they still give you pleasure and delight, and they're still not your permanent possession. And you want to experience the joy again, and you want it to go even more deeply into you the next time. So, how many times has your young child said, read it again, Daddy, read it again, Mommy, do it again, do it again, do it again. If they love something, they want it. Children know this. So, repetition means to seek again. It's from petitio, as we get the word petition, petitionary prayer, say. It means to ask for something. So you're coming back saying, I want this again. Maybe even I need this again. So that kind of repetitio, not rote drill and kill repetition. So it's lively, it's meaningful. And the reviews that we do are not always identical. They change, they can be different. Um, and this is what makes learning permanent. And of course, it's the form of multum non multa. It's even a form of festina lente. Keep going back. Keep going back as necessary to master each step, to go deep, to linger, to delight, to relish, to ponder. And so we reread certain things and we recite certain things. We review, which means to see it again. And we keep circling back around things that are good. That which means we need to know what the good is, what the core is that we're going to keep coming back to. And we can easily violate multum non multa if our lesson plans and quarterly plans and annual plans just have too much stuff and we're concentrating on covering all that stuff that the students aren't going to learn. Like, this is just classic where the kids are all getting A's, but then you come in and quiz them and they don't remember anything you've taught them. Why do we do that? So if we're going to teach to permanent possession, we have to do repetitio as well. So you see the relationship, therefore, with the previous ones and then the relationship to songs, chants, and jingles. Very easy to make. We need to sing too, especially with young children, but with all kids, even adults. If you sing something, your emotions will kick in, you will delight in it, but a different part of your brain gets activated. It strengthens the neural pathway. Something's going on cognitively. You're more likely to remember it and to enjoy it. And with children, we probably need to be singing and chanting with them about 5 times more than we're comfortable with because we're no longer children. So the 9-year-old will want to sing the history song every day, maybe twice or 3 times a day. They want to do it over and over again. And I think that's their own intuitive recognition that they want to permanently know something and they love doing it this way. Uh, Augustine says only the lover sings. So when you love something, you sing. And if you sing it, they're likely to love it. So why don't you put to song all of the important things that you really want them to remember, whether it's math facts, Latin vocabulary, history timelines, the water cycle, whatever it is. So in the book, we give you some examples, and of course, we're encouraging you to do the same, but sing. Okay, let's pivot to you guys, all of you who are on the call. I'm going to stop my sharing, and I know that you would if you're like me, wish we had unlimited time, and we could, and our brains could tolerate it. We might go through all 10, but it would take, a long time to try to teach you the whole book. So this is just a good place to pause and let you put some questions in the QA box, um, and interact with us a bit. So, what do you think? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? We'd love to hear from you.
While we're waiting for questions, I was just going to add that uh, our hope for this book, as I said before, is for both, homeschool parents and for teachers in the classroom. I think we have a mix of examples for both. And we hope, teachers, both teachers and homeschool parents use this book, in their own preparation for teaching. We'd love for especially classroom teachers to use it for professional development. I love coming to schools and providing professional development for teachers at a particular school, and really just kind of helping teachers figure out ways where they can practice these principles towards virtue. What was your hope for this, Chris?
Oh, um, I just hope that folks will be inspired to study this tradition, the pedagogical tradition that's come down to us in the past. Um, and that, maybe this book will be helpful to like putting organizing pearls on a string, because I'm sure that, like we said at the beginning, many of the folks on the call have come to know these things already, maybe with some different words, but if you've taught for 10 years, you've learned some of these things. But to help organize your own thinking and mind, prioritize and privilege these principles, and to help younger teachers you may know to do the same, I think, I've done staff training using these principles for a long time, and it seems to be helpful for many, not all. Um, so I hope that, we offer it to you as something that we hope will be of benefit to you. Carrie, you might want to just give everybody your email address too, so they can reach out to you, maybe in the chat box. So if someone wants to
Sure.
bring Carrie to a school or homeschooling co-op. Aaron is asking the question, how do we balance the Festina Lente principle with the most progressive educational paradigm of pushing students from grade to grade with a certain amount of information covered? Example, a student must cover all of geometry before moving to algebra 2. I'll go first and then see what Carrie says. You have to be realistic. Pacing has its place, especially with a class, and you have to use prudence to know how to move the whole class along. But you should know what the core is that you are responsible to teach every child. Like if say you're teaching geometry, what geometric principles, ideas need to be mastered before the student can come to algebra 2. That takes faculty coordination to know, but you should know what your core is that you will teach to mastery. Some things you may teach not to mastery for exposure and for inspiration, but the things that you want them to know, then well, you're responsible as well as a student to help you to know those things, and you're to teach it and they're to learn it, and it should be possible to teach it, or you're assigning too much work. Another issue is, are the students properly placed in your class to begin with? And if
Mhm.
not, that may be one reason why you wouldn't be able to move everyone to algebra 2, because the administration gave you a student who wasn't even ready for geometry. Well, so you need to be, a coordinator with the administration to make sure the students have been properly placed. And if not, you try to learn that sooner rather than later so that the student doesn't spoil his time studying geometry, um, when he wasn't quite ready for it.
Right. I was going to just add that so something that we practice at the Searcy Institute, um, we actually practice all of these 10 principles within the apprenticeship program. I encourage you to seek that out at this Searcy dot, I think it's searcyinstitute.org. If you look at their apprenticeship, we actually practice all of these principles within a 3-year apprenticeship program. But something that I brought up before, and I think this relates to making hay slowly, um, and multum non multa, just trying to figure out what things to teach and to work on. You have to know if you're teaching a fact or a skill or an idea, and about how long those things take. And so you have to know and be prudent about what it is you're teaching and assessing and how you're going to do that. And then again, choosing prudently the as Chris said, the core, the things that are the most valuable at that time, and that they must master in order to go on. So you could have a curriculum full of lots of logoi, lots of things and truths, but you have to kind of get down to the actual essence of what's the most important fact, skill, or idea that's being taught, and hone in on that. And it takes a prudent teacher, and it takes practice to do that, and to kind of sift through some of those and prune some of those things in a curriculum. And part of that is just knowing your content well too. So if you're teaching algebra and you need to teach all the algebra things or all the geometry things, as a teacher, what are the things that you have, the things you have to have in order to move on. And so as a teacher, you have to be practicing your own content and art of the subject that you're being taught. And then also, in addition, practice just the pedagogy of trimming unimportant things and going
Yeah.
deep with the important things. There is one more question here. It says, Michelle says, is this experience of Schole available for us to experience as homeschool educators? I would love to do a class where I am able to see these principles in action. I'm not totally sure exactly what the question is. I might need some clarity on that, but
I'm Yeah, I think I'm guessing what Michelle means is that she'd like to be in a class where she enjoys some Schole. And if that's the case, Michelle, I think the best thing to do is get in a good book club,
right,
where you have where there's a facilitator or people that you really respect who know how to discuss and literature and books. And if one great leader can make this happen, and then enjoy 90-minute book club once a week, even if you do it on Zoom. That's what the book club I'm in does. And it becomes a unrushed time to just talk about the ideas in a book. That could be one way you can do that. Sometimes I hear homeschooling educators call these moms groups. Like, moms will create groups where they come together, often, if not online, in an undistracted place where there's a beautiful setting. Maybe it's someone's home. There's some tea and there's some coffee, and it might even be 3 hours. Like, it's just an hour of fun and fellowship and 2 hours for the book study, but it's unrushed time to study something that's really worthwhile, like a great book, with people that you love, kindred spirits, and usually with food and drink. That
right,
that's the ideal of Schole. And can you bring that to your own homeschool with your children every day? No, but you can do it. You can do it at times in important segments. We often use the Sabbath as an illustration of this. You can't do it all the time. But what if 1/7 of your time was restful learning that was contemplative in a
yeah,
in a in a in an, a setting of Schole?
right. I love that. I love that question. I think it's a good question. As a homeschool mom myself, I would spend time with other uh, parents, and we would do careful reading. There's lots of different online programs to join. I know, I think Classical Academic Press has different groups, at different times to join as homeschool parents. Circe Apprenticeship, uh, as I mentioned, is a great way to do Schole over 3 years, and listening and loving good books, and also just different close reads. I know Circe has a close reads uh, podcast and group as well. So, but just even getting together, I had a really good friend who put together a charcuterie board and wine, and then they would read either a book on pedagogy together or a great work together. That was hard. That had to take time. Took a year, reading the Aeneid together or Shakespeare, something together. And then of course this goes right in with friendship and conversation, that we don't
Mhm.
do things all alone by ourselves, that good pedagogy takes people. So
Yeah.
this together. So good question, Michelle.
Yeah. And a helpful way to close, we all need that restful contemplative time with friends to study. And we need to bring this to our students as well. It's the root of the word school, after all. So, um, encourage you to take a look at that book, The Schole Way, and the Schole Way course as well. Schole Communities, I dropped in the Schole Communities website, might be another way to form a community that is dedicated to bringing Schole to homeschool. And then Carrie mentioned some great opportunities as well. But we do need to set aside time for this in our busy lives as teachers. We do. Just like we need to set aside one day in seven to focus on the church and Christ and fellow Christians, keep the Sabbath holy. So we know that's a challenge. It's a challenge in this cultural moment. And I think we all would say we're working on it personally. Another book to read that I think would be helpful is Habits of the Household by Justin Earley. Um, Carrie and I just were at a conference where he spoke. He's a thoughtful dad at a classical school who happens to be an attorney, and he's been working in his own life to try to find meaningful habits that restore a sense of sanity and peace to his own home and life. And he's just written very eloquently about it in the book. I'll just write it down here, Habits of the Household. And we actually interview him on Classical U. So if you go to classicalu.com and then go to Parent You, which is a free section, you'll see some interviews of Justin, little small little clips where he talks about that book. Well, thank you, everyone. We're honored that you gave us 90 minutes of your time, and thank you for the work that you are doing, either in your own homeschool or school. Um, we feel so honored to be collaborating, working together with so many wonderful teachers, parents, administrators around the country. We really love what you're doing, and by extension, we love you. So thank you for being with us, and have a good afternoon or evening wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.